Okay, so I'm gonna take this time to present an argument against all those that say that Manny Pacquiao only goes in against fighters coming off a loss or at a disadvantage, but this just isn't so. So I'm gonna give you a quick rundown. Since Manny Pacquiao fought Juan Manuel Marquez in March of 2008, his first opponent was David Diaz. Was David Diaz coming off a loss? No, he wasn't. He had just defeated Ramon Montaño on the undercard of Pacquiao versus Marquez. Now, people discredit this victory because Manny didn't take a fight against Juan Diaz or Joel Casamayor. But really, let's be honest with ourselves. How many fighters jump into a weight division and take on the top dog in their first fight? Not many. So to discredit that victory for testing the waters, I just don't think that's right. Gaining an easy title, all fighters do that nowadays. I mean, even Mayweather did that against Carlos Baldomir. Did anybody discredit that? You know, would Mayweather fans say I'm lying there? Mm-mm. Okay, so the next fight was against Oscar De La Hoya. Now, looking at it now, people discredit that victory because many say that Oscar De La Hoya was past it and that he was weight drained. But before the fight, not many were giving Manny a chance. They said he was too small, that Oscar would impose his size and his strength. So, you have to admire the fact that Manny took the fight regardless at a time when, people thought that he was going to lose and he himself didn't know if he could compete at the higher weight classes. And Oscar himself hadn't been coming off a loss either. He had just defeated Steve Forbes in May. So, Manny went in there, odds stacked against him. He went in there and did his thing and won. And I mean, honestly, who would have turned that fight down? Anybody that would turn the fight down with Oscar De La Hoya would be a fool. So, again, an argument against that, discredited it. Ricky Hatton. Now, many people discredit this victory because they say, oh, well, he lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr., but let's take one fact into account. The Ricky Hatton at 147 was not the Ricky Hatton at 140. The Ricky Hatton at 140 was still undefeated in the division. He was still a lineal champ. And he himself hadn't been coming off a loss either. He had just got a victory against Paulie Malignaggi. So for Pacquiao to go in there and get the lineal champ at 140 in a division that he was still undefeated in, knock him out in 2 rounds, how's anybody going to discredit that victory? So let's progress into the next fight against Miguel Cotto. Now, a lot of people would discredit this victory because people say that Cotto was shot after his fight with Antonio Margarito. But in this fight, before he fought Pacquiao, he fought Joshua Clottey. He persevered through a blood and guts battle. He won. So, again, this is another fighter that wasn't coming off a loss. This is a fighter that was coming off a victory. And how are you going to dispute the fact that there really wasn't any other better welterweights? I mean, Berto, still too green. Mayweather, let's get real. I mean, he wasn't going to fight Manny at that time. Mosley was pursuing Mayweather, so who else was left? Margarito was suspended. I mean, it only made sense that the best possible fight at the time was Miguel Cotto. And then people will say, well, Manny made him go in there at 145. But if Cotto didn't want to take the fight, he didn't have to. He still signed the contract. So, everything that happens after that, you can't discredit that. Now in this next fight, this is when people first started saying, okay, you beat Cotto, you beat Haddon, you beat De La Hoya, but now this is where you should really fight Mayweather. You really don't have a way out. Well, the first negotiation from December to February, didn't work out. We couldn't come to an agreement on the random blood testing. So knowing that Manny had to campaign in the Philippines, we had to find, a solid opponent for Manny. And we ran into Joshua Clottey. Joshua Clottey's a solid fighter. He gives most guys a run for their money. He's a sturdy test for anyone. On any given night, he can give anybody trouble. So, the fight itself wasn't really anything that was really spectacular, but, that's what you get against a guy that is defensive 70-80% of the time in the ring. So he would make anybody look bad. Anybody. Even a Mayweather, perhaps. So you can't discredit Manny for at least, taking his best shot against Clottey. So after that, Margarito gets off suspension. Now, a lot of people are saying, why would you give Antonio Margarito a fight? A lot of people were saying he cheated against Cotto. Couldn't you possibly find a better opponent? If you run through a list of possible candidates other than Margarito, really, who? Who could he have really fought? He still hadn't fought Mayweather, but, Mayweather was taking his vacation or whatever. Mosley, he had just come off a loss to Floyd Mayweather. So, really, that wasn't going to happen. Berto, in my eyes, he was still too green. So, it had to be Margarito. Margarito, despite getting dominated by Mosley, was still a tough out for anybody. And he was naturally the biggest opponent that Manny Pacquiao had fought up to that point. So, the fight made sense, at least in my eyes. I saw it as a credible fight. And Margarito himself hadn't been coming off a loss either. He had just got a victory against Robert Garcia. Not the trainer, the fighter. So he hadn't been coming off a loss either. And yeah, the fight, Margarito got dominated. But, he still went the full 12 rounds. Still gave it his all. And there really weren't many better opponents for Manny at that point. So you can't really discredit that victory either. Now, this last fight against Shane Mosley. Now, Shane Mosley hadn't been coming off a win, but he hadn't been coming off a loss either. He had been coming off a draw. But at this point, Manny had already fought Cotto, Margarito, Haddon, De La Hoya, Clottey. He wasn't going to fight Mayweather. Marquez was still with Golden Boy. So the only legit opponent we could have found for him was Shane Mosley. I know Shane Mosley, past prime. But, he still could have had another last great performance in him. in the fight pretty much just confirmed all the rumors that, yeah, after the fight we could all come to the conclusion that, Shane Mosley's done. But we just really still had to see if it was true. And, that's why I can't discredit that fight either. Now, his next fight is signed on for. People already are starting to dispute that this is the right fight. Okay, I will agree, this could have been a better fight 2-3 years ago, but I can accept the fight. I can accept the fact that he's fighting Juan Manuel Marquez in his next fight. Other than the fiasco against Mayweather, Marquez has been on a tear. He had that fight of the year victory against Juan Diaz. He beat him in a rematch. In his last fight, he beat Michael Katsidis. So, Juan Manuel Marquez is still a great fighter. So, to discredit Pacquiao, if he takes this fight, would be a serious, serious mistake. And this is yet another fighter that isn't coming off a loss. Now, that pretty much sums up my opinion on this. Now, out of all the fighters that I mentioned, only one was coming off a loss, and that was Clottey. The rest have been coming off a victory or a draw. Only one was coming off a loss. So to say that Manny Pacquiao only fights fighters coming off a loss is completely wrong. If anything, the only times I can think of Manny Pacquiao fighting a fighter that was coming off a loss was Eric Morales against Sahir Rahim, and Marco Antonio Barrera against Juan Manuel Marquez. But see, this is before he ever really became a big star. Since he's became a big star, he hasn't really fought anybody that was coming off a loss. And, you can't really say that any of these fighters are really coming off a disadvantage. And there really weren't many better opponents. I mean, people will mention Tim Bradley, Andre Berto, but to me, these fighters are still, a bit green. They still haven't proven enough to me that would warrant them a, legitimate challenge against Manny Pacquiao. They haven't really proven themselves. I mean, a lot of people are throwing out Tim Bradley's name, but, his best victory was probably against Devin Alexander, but that was a sloppy fight. So, to all the Mayweather fans, if you don't believe me, go check it out for yourself. The facts don't lie. Check it up on Wikipedia, boxing record. You can run through Manny's resume. You can look at all the fighters he's faced. So that's about it.